Sarah Bennett's hands trembled as she adjusted her navy blue blazer in the elevator mirror. The Chicago skyline twinkled behind her through the glass walls as she ascended to the 45th floor of the Riverside Tower. Tonight's charity gala was crucial for her law firm. They needed to raise funds for their pro bono program helping underprivileged communities. At 35, Sarah had built herself into one of Chicago's most respected defense attorneys. Her natural hair was styled in elegant twists, and her dark skin glowed under the elevator's soft lighting. She had fought hard to reach this position, proving herself in a field where few women looked like her. The elevator doors opened to reveal the grand ballroom already filled with Chicago's elite. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, and the soft music from the live band floated through the air. Sarah smiled and nodded at familiar faces as she made her way to the bar, ordering a glass of sparkling water with lime. "Everything looks perfect," her colleague Jessica whispered, appearing beside her. "The guest list is impressive. We might actually hit our fundraising goal tonight." Sarah was about to respond when the room's energy suddenly shifted. People began turning toward the entrance, their whispers growing louder. Curious, she glanced over her shoulder, and in that moment, her world stopped spinning. Marcus Thorne stood in the doorway. The crystal glass nearly slipped from her fingers. Sarah hadn't seen him in 15 years, but she would recognize him anywhere. He was older now, his face more defined, his shoulders broader in his perfectly tailored black suit. His dark brown skin contrasted sharply with his crisp white shirt, and success radiated from his confident stance. "Is that Marcus Thorne?" Jessica gasped. "The tech billionaire? I had no idea he was on the guest list." Sarah couldn't speak. Her mind raced back to their last moment together at Stanford, when she found his hastily written note on her dorm room desk. "I need to focus on my future," he'd written. "Please don't try to contact me." Those words had haunted her for years. The room felt suddenly too warm. Sarah watched as people flocked around Marcus, everyone eager to speak with the man whose technology company had revolutionized artificial intelligence. He smiled and shook hands, but his eyes scanned the room as if searching for something, or someone. Then their eyes met. Recognition flashed across his face. For a brief moment, the confident billionaire facade cracked, revealing the boy she'd once known, the scholarship student who'd shared his dreams with her over late-night coffee and ramen noodles. Sarah turned away quickly, her heart pounding. "I need some air," she muttered to Jessica, walking swiftly toward the balcony. The cool Chicago night air hit her face as she stepped outside, gripping the railing for support. "Sarah." His voice hadn't changed. She didn't turn around. "I didn't know you would be here," Marcus said softly, staying near the balcony door. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Of course you didn't. You haven't known anything about my life for 15 years. "You're right." His voice carried the weight of regret. "I've thought about you often." Now she did turn, anger replacing her shock. "Don't." The word came out sharp, cutting through the night air. "You lost the right to think about me when you disappeared without even saying goodbye." Marcus took a step forward, then stopped when she stiffened. "I know. I made a terrible mistake. I was young and scared. And now you're here, successful beyond imagination, just like you wanted." Sarah straightened her spine, channeling the confidence that had won her countless court cases. "Congratulations, Marcus. You got everything you were looking for." But as she moved to walk past him, he spoke again. "Not everything." Sarah paused, her hand on the door handle. For a moment, neither of them moved. The music from inside drifted out to the balcony, a melancholy jazz piece that seemed to echo the weight of their shared history. "Miss Bennett." A young associate appeared at the door. "The speech is about to begin. They need you at the podium." Sarah nodded, grateful for the interruption. "Thank you, I'll be right there." She glanced one last time at Marcus, whose eyes hadn't left her face. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Thorne." As she walked away, Sarah's steps were steady, her head high. But inside, her heart was racing, and 15 years' worth of buried emotions threatened to break free. She had a speech to give, funds to raise, and people depending on her. She couldn't let the unexpected appearance of Marcus Thorne derail everything she worked so hard to build. But deep down she knew, nothing would be the same after tonight. Sarah managed to deliver her speech perfectly, even with Marcus's eyes following her every move. As she described her firm's pro bono work, Memories of their shared past flooded back, taking her to where it all began 15 years ago. It was a rainy October evening at Stanford University when Sarah first met Marcus. She had been studying late in the library, struggling with her economics assignment. The library was almost empty when a tall, handsome student sat down at her table, his textbooks matching hers. "That problem set is brutal," he had said with a warm smile. "Mind if we work on it together?" That night, they spent hours solving equations and sharing stories. Sarah learned that, like her, Marcus was there on a full scholarship. He grew up in Detroit with his single mother, working part-time jobs since he was 14 to help with bills. She told him about her childhood in Atlanta, raised by her grandmother after losing both parents in a car accident. "We're both fighters," Marcus had said, looking at her with admiration. "That's why we're here." Over the next 2 years, they became inseparable. Sarah fell in love with Marcus's determination and brilliant mind. He was always working on new tech ideas, staying up late coding in his dorm room. She would bring him coffee and listen as he explained his vision for using artificial intelligence to change the world. They supported each other through tough exams, celebrated small victories, and dreamed about their future together. Marcus promised they would make it big someday, creating a legacy that would make their families proud. Everything changed during their senior year. Marcus's innovative AI project caught the attention of major venture capitalists. He was excited but stressed, spending more time in meetings than with Sarah. Still, she supported him, believing in their love. Then came that terrible morning. Sarah walked into her dorm room after her morning class to find a simple note on her desk. The paper was slightly crumpled, as if he had written and rewritten it several times. "Sarah, I need to focus on my future. Please don't try to contact me. Marcus." Sarah stared at the note for hours, unable to comprehend how 2 years of love could end with 3 sentences. She tried calling him, but his phone was disconnected. His dorm room was empty. It was like he had vanished into thin air. Back in the present, Sarah excused herself from a conversation with donors and walked to the bar. The memories were too intense. She ordered a glass of wine, something stronger than her usual sparkling water. "You always loved red wine." Marcus's voice came from behind her. "Some things don't change." Sarah turned to face him. "Some things do, like people who disappear without explanation." Marcus's confident facade cracked slightly. "I owe you an explanation." "It's 15 years too late," Sarah replied, but didn't walk away. "The venture capitalists," Marcus began, his voice low. "They gave me an ultimatum: end things with you or lose the funding." Sarah felt like she'd been slapped. "What?" "They said having a serious relationship would distract me from building the company. They wanted me focused only on work." Marcus's hands gripped his glass tightly. They also implied that having a black girlfriend might make some conservative investors uncomfortable. Sarah's anger blazed. "And you listened to them?" "I was young, scared, and stupid," Marcus admitted. "I grew up with nothing, Sarah. When they dangled millions in front of me, I panicked. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing, that I could help more people with money and success than without it." "You could have talked to me," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "We could have faced it together." "I know that now." Marcus looked at her with regret in his eyes. "I've made billions, built a tech empire, but I'd never forgiven myself for how I hurt you." Sarah finished her wine, needing a moment to process his words. Around them, the gala continued, but they stood in their own bubble of painful memories and unresolved feelings. "I should go," Sarah finally said. "Thank you for explaining, but it doesn't change what happened." As she walked away, Marcus called after her softly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sarah, just a chance to show you who I've become." Sarah kept walking, but her steps were heavy with the weight of his words. The past she tried so hard to forget was now wide open, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face what that meant. 3 days after the gala, Sarah sat in her corner office, trying to focus on case files. The city stretched out below her window, but her mind kept drifting to Marcus. She hadn't achieved all this by dwelling on the past, she reminded herself. Her assistant, Michael, knocked on her door. "Miss Bennett, there's a delivery for you." He wheeled in a cart with a beautiful arrangement of white lilies, her favorite flowers from college. Sarah's heart skipped when she saw the card. "Some things I never forgot." "Marcus." "Should I put them on your desk?" Michael asked. No, Sarah replied firmly. Don't make them to the children's hospital down the street. She turned back to her computer, ignoring the hurt look on Michael's face. Her assistant had never seen his boss reject flowers before. Later that afternoon, Sarah met with her best friend Tamika for lunch. They sat at their usual table in a small cafe near the courthouse. So, the famous Marcus Thorne is back, Tamika said, stirring her coffee. The same man who broke your heart and then became a tech genius worth billions. Sarah picked at her salad. He tried to explain why he left. And? Tamika leaned forward, curious. His investors told him to choose between me and the money. Sarah's voice was bitter. Guess which one he picked? Oh, girl, Tamika shook her head. But look at you now. While he was building his empire, you were making real change in people's lives. It was true. After Stanford, Sarah had thrown herself into her law career. She finished top of her class at Harvard Law, turned down big corporate firms, and instead chose to work with a public defender's office. She wanted to help people who reminded her of her grandmother, hard-working folks who just needed someone to fight for them. 5 years ago, she started her own firm, focusing on both corporate law and pro bono cases. Her unique approach caught media attention, and soon she was known as the people's lawyer, someone who could fight big corporations while still helping the community. Did you hear about his divorce last year? Tamika asked carefully. Sarah looked up sharply. No, I didn't. It was all over the news. He married some Silicon Valley heiress 6 years ago. It lasted barely 5 years. Tamika watched her friend's reaction closely. The rumors say he was never really in love with her. Before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed. It was an email from one of her biggest cases, a group of families suing a tech company for privacy violations. Her eyes widened as she read. What's wrong? Tamika asked. The company we're suing, it's just been bought by Marcus's corporation. Sarah put down her phone slowly. He's now directly involved in my case. Girl, that's not a coincidence, Tamika said. He's trying to force you to deal with him. Sarah thought about the meeting scheduled for tomorrow with the company's lawyers. Well, he's about to learn that I'm not the same girl he left behind. That evening, Sarah worked late, preparing for the meeting. She pulled up articles about Marcus's company, studying their recent acquisitions. His success was impressive. He had built an AI technology that transformed everything from healthcare to education. But he had also faced criticism for data collection practices, exactly what her clients were fighting against. Her phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. I heard about the case. We should talk before tomorrow's meeting. Marcus. Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Part of her wanted to ignore it, but the lawyer in her knew better. Understanding the opponent was crucial in any battle. She typed back. Fine. Coffee shop across from my office, 7 a.m. His response came quickly. I'll be there. Sarah leaned back in her chair, looking at the city lights. 15 years ago, she and Marcus had dreamed of changing the world together. Now they were on opposite sides of a legal battle that could affect thousands of people's lives. Tomorrow, she would face him not as the heartbroken college girl, but as a powerful attorney who had built her own legacy. She thought about the lilies she'd sent away, and the text message waiting for her response. Game on, Marcus, she whispered to herself. Let's see what you're really here for. She gathered her files, turned off her office lights, and headed home to prepare for what would surely be an interesting morning. At 6:55 a.m., Sarah walked into the coffee shop, purposely arriving early. The morning rush hadn't started yet, and only a few early customers occupied the tables. She chose a spot in the corner where she could see the door. Marcus arrived exactly at 7 a.m., wearing a casual black sweater instead of his usual business suit. He looked different in the morning light, more like the college student she once knew than the billionaire from the gala. You still take your coffee black? He asked, setting a cup in front of her. You didn't have to, Sarah said, but wrapped her hands around the warm cup anyway. I know. Marcus sat down, his own coffee untouched. About the case, I didn't buy the company to get to you. I'd been negotiating that deal for months. Sarah studied his face. Then why are we here? Because I want to settle the case, Marcus said. The families are right. The previous management was careless with user data. I want to make it right. Sarah leaned back, surprised. Just like that? No, not just like that. Marcus finally took a sip of his coffee. I want to tell you everything first, about why I really left 15 years ago. You deserve the whole truth. The coffee shop was getting busier, people rushing in for their morning fix, but in their corner, time seemed to slow down. Those investors, Marcus began, his voice low. They didn't just tell me to end things with you, they showed me documents. Research about how having a black CEO with a black partner would affect the company's value. They had statistics, market studies. Sarah's hands tightened around her cup, so it wasn't just about having a relationship. It was about having a relationship with me specifically. Yes, Marcus's voice was filled with shame. They said one black face at the top was diverse enough for investors. Two would make them nervous. They called it market reality. And you believed them? Sarah's voice cracked slightly. I was a coward, Marcus admitted. I had spent my whole life being told I had to work twice as hard to get half as far. When they dangled that money in front of me, I convinced myself I could do more good with it than without it. That maybe if I became successful enough, I could change things from the inside. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Did you? I tried. Once I had enough power, I started pushing back. Hired more people of color, funded black-owned startups, created scholarship programs. He laughed bitterly. But I couldn't change the fact that my first big decision was letting them win. What about your marriage? Sarah asked suddenly. Marcus looked surprised. You heard about that? It's hard not to hear about a billion-dollar divorce. Claire was from the right family, with the right connections, the perfect CEO's wife, according to my board. Marcus stared into his coffee, but you can't build a marriage on appearances. We both knew it wasn't real. The morning sun was streaming through the windows now, casting long shadows across their table. Sarah thought about all the times she'd imagined this conversation over the years, all the questions she'd wanted to ask. Why now? She finally said. Why are you telling me all this now? Because I'm tired of playing by their rules, Marcus replied. I built enough power and wealth that they can't control me anymore. And when I saw you at the gala, successful and beautiful, and everything I remembered. He paused. I realized I didn't want to hide from the truth anymore. Sarah checked her watch. The settlement meeting is in 2 hours. I know. Marcus straightened up. Whatever you think is fair for the families, I'll agree to it. No negotiations, no legal games. Just make it right. Sarah stood up, gathering her things. This doesn't fix what happened, Marcus. I know it doesn't, he said softly. But maybe it's a start. As Sarah walked toward the door, she stopped and turned back. The scholarship program at your company, the one for black students in tech? Yes. Make it bigger. Much bigger. And name it after your mother, not yourself. A genuine smile spread across Marcus's face, the kind she remembered from their college days. Already working on it. Sarah nodded and left the coffee shop, her mind racing. In 2 hours, she would face him across a conference table as opposing counsel. But now, for the first time in 15 years, she felt like she could finally breathe freely around him. The truth hadn't fixed everything, but it had cracked open a door she thought was permanently closed. The law firm's conference room was tense as lawyers from both sides gathered for the settlement meeting. Sarah sat at one end of the long table, with the families she represented behind her. Marcus sat at the opposite end, surrounded by his corporate legal team. The terms are fair, Sarah stated, sliding the settlement documents across the table. Full compensation for privacy violations, a complete system overhaul, and public accountability measures. Marcus picked up the papers without even looking at them. We accept all terms. He signed each page methodically, ignoring the shocked looks from his own lawyers. Mr. Thorne, we should review, one of his attorneys started. It's done. Marcus cut him off, pushing the signed papers back to Sarah. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, Marcus caught up with Sarah in the hallway. Have dinner with me tonight, he said quietly. Just to talk. Sarah shook her head. That's not a good idea. Sarah, please. Just dinner. No. Her voice was firm. The case is settled. There's nothing more to discuss. Later that afternoon, Sarah sat in her office, trying to focus on other cases. Her phone kept lighting up with texts from Tamika. Girl, did you see the news? Marcus just announced a $500 million expansion of his scholarship program. They're naming it after his mom, the Regina Thorne Technology Initiative. Sarah, I know you had something to do with this. Sarah turned her phone face down. She couldn't deal with this right now. But as she opened her laptop, a news alert popped up. Marcus was giving a press conference about the scholarship program. Against her better judgment, she clicked play. Marcus stood at the podium, looking more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him in public. This initiative, he was saying, is dedicated to my mother, who worked 3 jobs to give me an education. But it's also an apology. Years ago, I let fear and prejudice influence my decisions. I chose wealth over integrity. Today, I'm trying to make that right. Sarah closed the video, her hands shaking slightly. Her assistant knocked on the door. Miss Bennett, there's someone here to see you. Sarah looked up to find Regina Thorne, Marcus's mother, standing in her doorway. The older woman had aged gracefully, her hair now silver, but she had the same kind eyes Sarah remembered from college. Regina? Sarah whispered, standing up. Oh, baby girl. Regina opened her arms, and Sarah found herself walking into them. I've missed you. They sat together on the office couch, and Regina held Sarah's hands in hers. When Marcus told me the truth about why he left you, I was so disappointed in him. I didn't raise my son to run from love because some rich white men told him to. He was young, Sarah said softly. So were you, Regina replied, and you didn't run. Sarah blinked back tears. Why are you here, Regina? Because my son is finally doing what he should have done 15 years ago, standing up for what's right, and because I know he still loves you, he never stopped. It's not that simple anymore. Of course it's not, Regina agreed. But nothing worth having ever is. She stood up, straightening her dress. Just think about it, that's all I'm asking. After Regina left, Sarah walked to her window, watching the sunset paint the sky orange. Her phone buzzed again, another text from Marcus. I understand if you never want to see me again, but I'll keep working to be the man I should have been back then. The scholarship program is just the beginning. Sarah typed and deleted several responses before finally sending. Your mother came to see me. His reply was immediate. I didn't ask her to. I know. She never did like being told what to do. Like someone else I know. Sarah almost smiled at that. Almost. She put her phone away and gathered her things to head home. As she walked through the darkening city streets, she thought about Regina's words, about Marcus's press conference, about second chances and redemption. She had built her life and career on helping people find justice, on believing in the possibility of change. But believing it for herself, for her own heart, that was something entirely different. When she reached her apartment, she had one more text waiting. The door's open whenever you're ready. No pressure, no rush. I learned how to wait for what matters. Sarah didn't respond, but for the first time in 15 years, she didn't immediately delete his message either. Sometimes she thought, that's how change begins. Not with a yes, but with the simple act of not saying no. 2 weeks after Regina's visit, Sarah found herself constantly checking news about Marcus's company. Every day brought new announcements, diverse hiring initiatives, community programs, and technology training centers in underserved neighborhoods. One morning, her assistant Michael rushed in excitedly. Miss Bennett, turn on the news. Marcus Thorne just appointed the first black woman as his company's chief technology officer. Sarah switched on the office TV. There was Marcus, standing beside Dr. Janet Robinson, a brilliant computer scientist Sarah remembered from their Stanford days. She had been a teaching assistant in their programming class. Dr. Robinson has been overlooked by the tech industry for too long, Marcus was saying. This appointment is not about diversity statistics. It's about recognizing excellence that others were too prejudiced to see. Sarah noticed something different about Marcus in this press conference. He seemed more genuine, more like the passionate student she'd known in college, less like the polished billionaire from the gala. Later that day, Sarah received an email from Janet Robinson herself. Sarah, I hear you're the one who pushed Marcus to do better. Thank you. Some of us have been waiting a long time for someone to remind him who he really is. Sarah was still thinking about that email when Tamika came by her office for their weekly lunch. You're not going to believe who I saw having coffee with Regina Thorne this morning, Tamika said, settling into a chair. Who? Your grandmother Rose. Sarah nearly dropped her sandwich. What? They were at that little cafe near your grandmother's house, talking like old friends. Tamika watched Sarah's reaction carefully. Seems like Marcus's mama is doing some matchmaking. Grandma Rose wouldn't fall for that, Sarah said firmly. Girl, your grandmother told me to tell you she's having Sunday dinner this weekend, and you better come because there's going to be sweet potato pie. Sarah groaned. Her grandmother's sweet potato pie was legendary, and she only made it for special occasions. That Sunday, Sarah walked up the familiar steps to her grandmother's small house. The smell of pie and roast chicken filled the air, but when she opened the door, she stopped short. Marcus was sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table, helping to peel sweet potatoes. There's my girl, Rose said, wiping her hands on her apron. Marcus here was just telling me about the community center he's building in our neighborhood. Sarah looked between her grandmother and Marcus, speechless. Don't give me that look, Rose said. Regina and I have been planning this for weeks. Now sit down and help with these potatoes. Throughout dinner, Sarah watched as Marcus charmed her grandmother, talking about his mother, his work, and his plans for more community projects. But what struck her most was how he kept looking at her when he thought she wasn't watching. After dinner, while Rose and Regina chatted in the kitchen, Marcus and Sarah sat on the front porch swing, just like they used to do in college when visiting Sarah's grandmother. I should be mad at you for ambushing me like this, Sarah said. Are you? Surprisingly, no, she looked at him. You've changed. I'm trying to be the person I should have been back then, Marcus said quietly, the person who was brave enough to stand up for what mattered. The community center you're building, it's going to help a lot of people. It's not about making headlines anymore, Marcus replied. It's about making things right, not just with you, but with myself. The evening air was warm, and from inside came the sound of their mothers laughing together. It felt both strange and familiar, like finding an old photograph you'd forgotten about. Sarah, Marcus turned to face her. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm hoping you might be willing to see who I am now, not just who I was then. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. The porch light cast soft shadows on his face, and in his eyes, she saw both regret and hope. I'm not making any promises, she said finally. Marcus smiled, that genuine smile she remembered from college. That's okay, I'm just grateful for the chance to try. They sat in comfortable silence, the porch swing moving gently, while inside their mothers plotted and planned, and the future held possibilities neither of them had imagined just weeks ago. A month after the Sunday dinner, Sarah agreed to meet Marcus for coffee regularly. They kept things casual, meeting at their old favorite spot near her office. But one rainy evening, everything changed. Sarah arrived at the coffee shop looking upset. Marcus could tell something was wrong the moment she sat down. What happened? He asked, pushing her usual coffee toward her. I just lost a big case, Sarah said, her voice tight. A corporation's legal team buried us in paperwork. My clients, they're just regular people who got hurt by bad products. They deserve better. Marcus reached for her hand, but Sarah pulled back sharply. Don't, she said. This is exactly what I was afraid of back then. Big money crushing regular people, and you chose to be part of that world. Sarah. No, she stood up suddenly. I need to say this. For 15 years, I've held these words inside. The coffee shop was almost empty. Rain pattered against the windows as Sarah finally let out everything she'd been holding back. You didn't just break my heart, Marcus. You broke my trust. We were supposed to be different. We were going to change things together. Instead, you became exactly what we fought against. Marcus sat quietly, taking her words. Do you know how hard it was? Sarah's voice cracked. Watching you become this huge success, knowing you thought I wasn't good enough to be part of it. That being with me would hurt your image. That's not. Let me finish. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Every time I saw your face in the news, every time I heard about another billion-dollar deal, I remembered that scared young man who chose money over love. Over me. Marcus stood up now too, his own emotions breaking through. You think I don't hate myself for that? You think I don't wake up every day wishing I could go back and be braver? Then why did it take you 15 years to say that? Sarah demanded. Because I was ashamed. Marcus's voice rose. Because every success made me feel worse about what I'd done. Because watching you become this amazing, strong woman while I lived with my cowardice was harder than you'll ever know. The few remaining customers were trying not to stare. Sarah and Marcus stood facing each other, both breathing hard. When those investors showed me those documents, Marcus continued, his voice quieter now, about how having two black faces at the top would hurt the company. I didn't just believe them. I hated myself for believing them. But I was so scared of going back to being poor, of disappointing my mother. Your mother was disappointed anyway, Sarah said softly. I know. Marcus sank back into his chair. She told me I'd lost my soul the day I left you. She was right. Sarah sat down too, suddenly tired. The rain had gotten heavier outside. All these changes you're making now, she said. The scholarships, the community programs, hiring Janet. It's not for show, Marcus interrupted. It's not to win you back. It's because you were right about who I was supposed to be. Who we were supposed to be. Sarah wiped a tear from her cheek. I wanted to hate you for so long. But watching you these past few months, seeing you finally stand up for what's right, it's like seeing the old Marcus again, the one I fell in love with. Marcus looked at her hopefully. Is that a good thing? I don't know yet, Sarah admitted. But it's a start. They sat in silence for a while, the coffee's going cold. Outside, the rain began to ease. That case you just lost, Marcus finally said. Send me the details. Maybe my legal team can help, not to take over, but to support your fight. Sarah studied his face. You do that? Sarah, I'd do anything to show you that I'm not that scared boy anymore. That I finally understand what matters. As they left the coffee shop that evening, something had shifted between them. The air felt clearer, like after a storm. They hadn't solved everything, but the truth was finally out there, raw and real and healing. Sarah watched Marcus walk away in the light rain, and for the first time in 15 years, she felt the weight of unspoken words lift from her heart. 6 months after their emotional confrontation in the coffee shop, Sarah sat in her office reviewing the details of her latest victory. With Marcus's legal team supporting her firm, they had won the case she'd previously lost. The families would finally get justice. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Dinner tonight to celebrate. Sarah smiled, typing back, yes, the usual place at 7. Their relationship had evolved slowly over these months. They weren't dating exactly, but they weren't just friends either. They were finding their way back to each other, one step at a time. At the restaurant, a small Italian place they discovered together, Marcus was already waiting at their regular table. To justice, he raised his glass of wine. To doing what's right, Sarah clinked her glass against his. As they ate, Sarah noticed something different about Marcus. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his napkin. What's on your mind? She asked. Marcus took a deep breath. I've been thinking about stepping down as CEO. Sarah nearly dropped her fork. What? I want to focus on the foundation, the community projects, education initiatives, technology access programs. Janet's ready to take over as CEO. The board won't like it, but they can't stop me. Are you sure about this? Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. 15 years ago, I chose corporate success over what really mattered. I'm not making that mistake again. He squeezed her hand gently. I want to do what we always talked about in college, using technology to help people, to make real change. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. You don't have to give up your company to prove anything to me. I'm not doing it for you, Marcus said. I'm doing it for me. For that boy from Detroit who wanted to change the world before he got scared and lost his way. He paused. But I'm hoping you might want to be part of it. What do you mean? The foundation needs a strong legal team. Someone who knows how to fight for the little guy. Marcus looked at her hopefully. We could work together, like we always planned. Sarah sat back, considering his words. You know I won't give up my firm. I wouldn't want you to. Your firm could partner with the foundation. We could help more people together than either of us could alone. Later that evening, they walked through the city park near the restaurant. The night was warm, stars twinkling above the city lights. Remember that night at Stanford? Marcus asked. When we stayed up until sunrise, planning how we'd change the world. Sarah nodded. We were so young, so sure of everything. We were right about what mattered. Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her. We were just wrong about how to get there. Sarah looked up at him, seeing both the boy she loved and the man he'd become. We're not those kids anymore. No, Marcus agreed. We're better, stronger, wiser. He took both her hands in his. I love you, Sarah. I never stopped. But I had to become someone worthy of you first. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks. You did something better than that. You became worthy of yourself. When they kissed, it felt both familiar and new, like coming home to a place that had been renovated while you were away. They broke apart smiling. So, Marcus said, "Want to change the world together?" Sarah laughed, a sound full of joy and possibility. Yes, but this time, we do it right. As they walked hand in hand through the park, they talked about their plans, mixing Sarah's legal expertise with Marcus's technology resources, creating programs that would give others the chances they'd had to fight for. They had both changed over those 15 years apart. But maybe, Sarah thought, they had needed that time to become the people who could not just love each other, but build something meaningful together. Their story hadn't ended with that note in her dorm room after all. It had just taken a longer path to reach its true beginning.